we're going to get started. And for those of you that, I think I know everybody on here, but if not, I'm Laurie Jennifer, and I just welcome you. And I welcome you because you are all women that are willing to have a conversation, and it's one that might get uncomfortable. So I applaud that. I applaud the vulnerability. I applaud the ability to step into the discomfort and want to learn more, because that's what I believe is going to make all of this change possible, is for us to be sitting around a big, beautiful kitchen table on Zoom. So that said, just a little bit of housekeeping. So all of you are microphones on mute. Great. Cameras on or off, totally your choice. Jen had said she loves seeing faces and being able to talk. So that's, as do I, but Jen is our guest. So that's a request there. Not a request, but your choice. And then this will be recorded. So if you're not comfortable with this being recorded, then maybe just turn off your microphone, and that's totally fine too. And
camera.
And camera, sorry, that's what I meant. Yeah, thank you. And a disclaimer, and this is so much so that we, and it'll kind of lend to it of how this conversation started, but by no means are we coming here to be experts by anything. I mean, Jen is brilliant, so she is an expert. But we are here having a conversation really as two friends, and we've invited our friends to join us. So that said, we don't have an answer per se. We don't have a prescription we're going to give you to say, hey, this is how we're going to solve things moving forward. This literally is a conversation to start, and my hope and desire is that it will spark other conversations for all of you guys. There's over 30 of you on here, of now go and have more conversations and continue the conversation. So that said, I put here, we're sharing our perspective, we're coming at it from, I'm a life coach, so I'm looking at it from that lens, but truthfully, I'm on here as a white woman living in Langley that is feeling stuck of how can I at all make a difference in all of this that's going on in the world. And I'll let Jen introduce of her, I can't even ramble on. I said, does that all fit on a business card? I'm not entirely sure.
Whatever.
So without further ado, Jen Atkins, can you give us well, no, not even a brief. Brag away, man.
I will be brief, so we can get to questions for sure. You want to know who I am?
Yeah.
My name is Jennifer Adkins. I'm married. I have twin, I can't say boys because they're 20, so I guess twin men. I was born in Ontario, Kitchener, Ontario, moved to Alberta in the 80s, moved to BC in 2009. I am finishing my doctorate at UBC in sociology for race and ethnicity, or race relations is more where I'd want to go. All the years that I finished my master's and worked, I did a lot in race relations, anti-racism, diversity, school board, not-for-profit, and all levels of government. That's good for me. If that's good for you, I have a job coming up where I will be the Vice President of Inclusion Excellence, I think is what the title is.
Yeah, cool title. Like that.
That's such a cool title. I didn't make it up either.
So fun. All right. So a little bit of backstory of how this all got started was literally I reached out to Jen and said, well, we met, I was counting on my hands today, 7 years ago at a retreat that you and I both attended, and roomed together, and we actually were late for every function because we just kept talking. So we know we have lots in common and we talk lots. So when all of this started to happen, I, as a woman of white color, went, what the heck? Like, how does this even play out? And how does this play out in Canada was a question I had. And so I text my friend and I just said, I'm not even going to pretend to understand what's going on. And actually, another disclaimer, I'm going to get quite possibly emotional about this. I'm not wearing my coaching hat right now. I am wearing a wife hat, a mom hat, a woman hat, a mother hat of just going, how can I show up as the best version of myself with this? And so I reached out to Jen and I said, what can I do? And I don't even know if there's anything I can do, but I just want you to know that I'm here for you. And that started a conversation for us. which then led later to me having this nickel going, okay, I have you all to myself. I need to share you with others because you're helping. Even the conversation we had to spark the conversation to have this was full of nuggets. So I think maybe we'll start there about, well, and I think I want to back up again. When I say I'm a life coach, my passion and vision is to help women create more joy. And this season of everything that's going on and the hard conversations about race and diversity and biases and all of this stuff, deaths, like all of it is, there's joy missing in that. And so that was my part too of spinning, going, okay, how can we, and how can we step into that? And I believe knowledge is power in part of that. So I don't have any knowledge in this regard. I have great questions. So that was asking Jen, saying, would you be kind enough to come speak with us? And even Jen, when we had that conversation, I went, it's not even fair to ask probably one of the only Black women that I know to now have to be the one to educate us. Is that even fair? And we had that conversation, and you were so vulnerable with me of saying the only thing standing in your way of saying no would be pride, right?
And I'd just add a caveat maybe to that is not every Black person is going to feel that way, because I'm sure there's a general feeling. And when I speak, it's strictly about my views on maybe anecdotal information that I've had in conversation. And if it's statistically supported, then I'll say that. But not everyone's going to feel the same way. And I can't speak for everyone. I believe that that's my personality. I like to teach, but there is fatigue. There's fatigue in talking about it so much. And I'd also say personally, and been told by many Black individuals, that so much talking's been done and not a lot of believing. And so there's a mask that I put on and that many of my, I guess, fellow Blacks put on, where you will feel and experience something as raw as, you know, with George Floyd's killing, and then put the mask on and move on and experience life and go to meetings and smile and act like it hasn't happened. And when Laurie got a hold of me, that it was suddenly it was a switch. Something was going on that I hadn't seen before, where everyone was getting involved. Not just the Black population and people I know in my community, but everyone was talking about it and grieving it and upset about it. And that was a shock, almost to the point where it was uncomfortable because I didn't know how to display emotion. I'm used to covering that up, that part of my life. And I think when you talk to people of color, they'll talk to you about having fragmented or segmented selves, where you can show only one part because another part is not palatable, comfortable for the white majority. And so you learn to just show half of yourself. So the people that I do know, hello to all of you, it's good to see you. You know only a segment of me, a portion of me. You don't know who is probably what is more of my identity, being a Black woman, because that follows me in a room. Actually, that precedes me. It comes in before I come in. And me being a woman, me being an educator, none of that matters, because my skin color informs what you see in me, who I am, before I could even say who I am. So I learned very early on to sell myself quickly. You know, the elevator speech you hear about, I give one so that people know I may not be the stereotypical Black woman that you have in your mind. Yeah.
You know what?
That was jumping right into it right there, Laurie.
Love it. I love it. And it brings up the and for all of you, like, we made an agenda out the window already. It's like, we're just real and raw. Like, we're just getting in and having a conversation. We do have your questions, so we will get to those as well. But, you know, one of the conversations we had years ago that literally turned me upside down, and in such a good way, and I hope you caught that in the text when I sent it to you with a smiley face, was us having this heated conversation and me saying, but I don't see color. And holy crap, did that ever piss you off?
Right? Oh, it pissed me off, did it?
Yeah, because you said, no, I want you to see color. And yet as somebody that has been raised to believe, no, we're all going to sing Kumbaya and hold hands and we're all equal. I haven't been raised to believe to see color. As if it's a beautiful thing. And then, so your answer surprised me, but now I'm starting to just get it a little bit. So
Yeah.
help us understand that.
Well, I think I've heard it so much. I'd say more so 90s, that became the thing, the colorblind theory, where people are saying, you know, I can't be racist because I don't see color. I had my twins, and by the time they were 2, my husband's white. By the time they were 2, they could tell we had skin color differences. So yes, you see color. Everybody sees color. I think what people want to say is they may not have the stereotypes or the biases attached to it. Kids don't have that. But as we grow, and I think that's something we have to be really careful of, racism isn't a direct hit to people as much as I say, especially white people feel. It's not a direct hit. It's that there is a system, this society, that was built on racism, on racialized premises, where we are kind of controlling, and I can even say patriarchal, and I know that you'll all relate to that, right? So white men were developing it. They weren't thinking of women. That changed in time. They weren't thinking of people of color. That's still changing. We're fighting for that kind of change. And so knowing and being identified as a Black girl, Black child, Black woman, I know people look at me. I'll talk to someone on the phone and they'll see me and they'll stumble like, oh my gosh, I thought you were white. I've had people say, oh goodness, I didn't know you were Black. I thought you were white, because I'm not sure what they're expecting me to hear, you know, expecting me to speak like. I grew up in Canada. I don't know if I should be speaking another language that would maybe help people understand me a bit more. I don't fully understand, but I know you see color, you see my color. So when people say I don't see your color, I understand you're saying I just see you as human, and that you should, because I am human. But seeing my color is seeing me, because my every day is reflected, my every experience is influenced by color, because I don't walk around thinking I'm a Black woman. When I teach my class, I kind of make it humorous, and I don't wake up in the morning saying I'm Black, I'm Black, I'm Black. No, I'm just a woman. And I will have someone react in a way and it will remind me, oh, they're seeing a Black woman. So it taints every single thing I do. It's a lens I have where it's almost apologetic. But as I grow older, I realize there's nothing shameful about being a Black person or a Black woman. I'm a beautiful creation, and I have to accept that. There's a lot of battling I do in my mind because of my experiences, but I don't allow that to dominate. So if someone sees me and says, sees I'm Black, I believe that we're starting at a very honest place to have a conversation.
So good, right? Because again, just coming, and that's where we have the conversation of, from my mindset, that was something that was showing racism, right? By showing that there was differences, right? So it's just that, and
I get it.
The work that I've been doing, all of this since George Floyd, has been really examining my own biases and that's made me feel really uncomfortable, thinking, oh my gosh, do I have them? Here, I didn't think I had them. And could I? And what does that mean? And all of a sudden, that is the way our brain works, is to protect us, and it wants to solve the problem, right? And all of a sudden, it's like some of my internal thinking that has just been the way that I've been raised, which I want to say has been raised well, is all of a sudden being told it's not correct. So all of a sudden there's this internal, and that's why I started this going. So I literally threw up my hands and went on Black, we talked about this in our first conversation, is Blackout Tuesday, right? When I'd shared, and I went, okay, I want to support this, as many of you probably did. And I blacked out my screen and I'm like, okay, I want to support this. And then a mutual friend of Jennifer's and I had posted saying, hey friends, did you know you're clogging up the Black Lives Matter thing over here? That's not helping. It would be more helpful if you did X, Y, and Z. And she gave kind of some other suggestions to do. And I went, okay. So I instantly saw the thought going, okay, I can't win, right? So I'm not going to do anything. And it was interesting. That's when I thought, no, I got to push through that. and figure out and be uncomfortable. And here's this woman willing to share what her vision was. Okay. And as I understand it, it wasn't everybody's vision as a Black woman or person to say you should be doing one or the other. So maybe speak to that about what we are currently doing and how we can gauge that, perhaps. Again, from your perspective, it's not everybody's.
Sorry, clarify that. What you're currently doing in what way?
In what way of us even reaching out and of how we can be helping? I think that was a common thread, and we'll get to some of the questions, but what can we right now currently of the climate of wanting to get involved and to make changes?
Okay.
But there is not necessarily one standard way to do it.
Yeah. I would start with recognize that there's something wrong. Even if you're unable to put your finger on what's going on, that would be first and foremost. I really appreciate how many white people got involved and felt emotion. And like I said, it makes me emotional to think about it because this has been a very lonely journey. And to see other people besides Black people feeling like there's something wrong. If I told you the numbers, many Canadians will say, and I teach this, we don't have racism in Canada. Absolutely 100%. You better believe we do. And where there is a large Black population, they're actually, we're looking per capita, experiencing more racism in policing than they are in the States if we're looking per capita. So we're not off the hook. And so the first idea of knowing there's something very wrong here, it feels uncomfortable, but what is it? Let's talk about it. Number one, doing screens or whatever else, or going out to protest. I think you make that call yourself. I would say, what I'd caution is just doing it because it's the thing to do, and I don't want to look like a racist and I don't want to look bad. Those are the wrong reasons to participate in anything. And I've also read some articles of people saying, oh, you know, all these white people want to start reading books and have book clubs. They get to do book clubs and it's life and death for us. And I can relate, don't get me wrong. I can hear that and say, yeah. But at the same time, again, I think I've been given a gift maybe of being able to step back and look at other perspectives. And yeah, there are days I'm angry. Laurie caught me when she got a hold of me on a day I was just broken and gutted is what it felt like. There are days where I feel that way, but my heart is that people just understand that racism is real. And the amount of stories, I could spend an entire 2 hours talking about things that I've gone through in my life. And I don't spend 2 hours, but I do that in class, but I do it after the students see me, humanize me, realize that I'm okay, and they might even like me. And because when I talk about ticketing or carding, what they do in the state, or sorry, what they do in Canada, more so all across Canada, but Ontario was made illegal finally, where they would just say, this person looks suspicious, and they get their information and they put it in a big database. Well, it worked out that it was mainly Black men that they were carding. And so when I tell my students, they'd say, well, maybe they were all criminals. And I'd feel it, but I wouldn't show it. I just continue teaching. But when I tell them about my experiences that I've had with police officers, then they go, oh, well, I like her. She's nice. She's not stereotypically Black. So there must be an issue going on. Does that answer your question, or did I just go too many places with that?
No, you never will. Like, this is, I love it. I love how you're answering so vulnerable. My question, I think, is, what was my half sec? Oh, I know this. When we talk about, and this leads to one of my questions, was what would you offer inclusion then looks like? Because now we're talking about, and again, this is my lens, and many of you I've talked to of going, okay, how do we diversify? And a lot of organizations and churches are talking about that of being inclusive, but how is it not perceived by doing it just to be politically correct, right? And
or
again,
tokenism. We call that tokenism.
Tokenism, okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. And my answer, because everyone, just like you have heterogeneous whiteness there is heterogeneous Blackness, so I can't speak for the entire Black population. I don't think the solution is all of a sudden grabbing the first, and I've seen that in organizations that I've worked for. It's like, we've got to have numbers because we are federally regulated, and there's no punishment. There is no affirmative action in Canada. So I'm going to say that clearly. But the federally regulated organizations will do a tally of women, people of color, Indigenous people, and people with disabilities, because if they're being funded by federal government, they want to see that they are diversifying. And so I've been in organizations where they would just grab anyone they can so they could boost their numbers up, or just ignore it, because our policy doesn't have a lot of teeth. It doesn't do a lot of damage if you don't listen to it. But some people want to follow it in some way in good faith. What you do is more damage if you grab the first person. Statistically, it is proven that people who have foreign names will not get the job. So there have been tests done, studies done, where they'll switch the name and do the exact same credentials. And the Anglo-sounding name compared to the foreign-sounding name will get it every time. And the foreign names will be put on the bottom of the pile. And that's a consistent, it was done in the States first, and it's done in Canada many times. So the problem isn't that we should be shoving people in. I think we would have to back that up a little bit and say, why are organizations lacking in diversity? Are people of color more stupid, less educated? Okay, so let me go back. University, a lot of people of color, but the jobs aren't happening. Okay, so there's something going on there. So when you look at the data tells us, just like women were not well represented in the workplace, that people of color and Indigenous people are also not represented in the workplace. Well, maybe they don't want the jobs. Nope, they're applying for the jobs. And so when people say, okay, we've got to start doing it, I think what happens is you've got to look at yourself or look at your organization and say, how are we going about looking for people? Are we saying, hey, my cousin Bob has a sister who's looking for a position, so she's going to come and work with us? If that's going on, you're going to have a pretty homogenous workforce. But if you're saying, let me find the person who's best for the job. So that means I have to diversify where I look for that job. So, or sorry, where I post that job.
Sure.
So it's being diverse in where you go to look for that, and then hiring people who are best qualified. Now, if you do that, your workplace would look very different. And so just grabbing people who have different colored bodies is not the intention. It's actually challenging yourself enough to say, what in my policy might actually keep people out without me even thinking about it? And I think the most interesting thing that I'm learning with my white friends, I have many white friends. You hear that comment used reverse. I thought I'd throw that in there as a joke just to lighten it up a bit. I don't see smiles, so I think I should throw that in there. With my white friends, I realized that they are actually innocently not seeing things going on. So there are different lenses, and we talk about biases. Those are biases. How does a man understand what it's like to be a woman? You know, if you're a mom, if you ever worked and had to fight and scrap to get where you're going, there's a disconnect. This is the disconnect we have. Because if I talk to someone on the phone and I want to get an apartment, true story, get there with my fiance, because this is going to be our place, we're getting married, and get looked at and get told, we don't take your kind in here. And this is not me slacking and wearing my ball cap and my ripped up jeans, because I learned very young as a child, as many Black kids do, don't ever leave the house looking like that. So I do have an issue. I cannot dress down. I have to look my best so that people will see me and not think badly of me. So yes, when that sort of thing happens, and I try to tell someone about it who's never experienced that, they're gonna go, no, I don't believe that. But when it happens again and again and again, or when I've got my little boys in their little twin carriage and I'm not feeling like I wanna be dressed to the hilt, I go out to the mall and suddenly I have security guards and people in stores looking in my stroller. Like, this is life for some people. And I think stretching yourself enough to see that the way they see life is not the way I see life. So I think if you can use an example is think about the way a man sees he sees his life. You've seen a man in a boardroom, right? The comfort, the ease, the man sprawl and the whole bit. I'm stereotyping, so don't generalizing. It is very different than a woman is in that environment. So take that on top of that. And now there's an intersection. I'm a woman and I'm a Black woman. So how I behave, how I speak, I don't want to get too loud because I'll be the angry Black woman. I don't want to get too confident because I'll be called cocky and arrogant. And it's just managing, constant managing in every environment that I go into. And so when you see a lot of Black people or a lot of Asian people or whoever else hanging around, that's a lot to do with that. I don't have to work so hard. And there's an understanding, an unspoken understanding that we have with each other that we know what we've got to go through.
Right.
Yeah.
Talk to me about something else we mentioned. And again, you helped kind of open my lens to it. Is I had said, I had shared with you, and some of them are on here, if some of my coaching colleagues are from the States.
Yes.
And I had even said to you going, well, I feel so blessed that we're in Canada on this side of the border. And you chuckled and you said, well, at least in the States, they know what they're up for. We are so Canadian and polite that we hide our racism behind please and thank yous, typically.
Yes.
So talk to me a bit about that.
You'll hear it a lot from Blacks who've lived in the States and they come out here and they'll say, it's harsh, but I know where I stand. And so I'm sure you've been online where you see the Karens or people who are ranting, racist rants, and you're like, oh my gosh. And I'm sure it's even harder for Canadians to deal with because that is just not our style in general. But the difference is, there's a professor I was talking to and she said, at least I knew where I stood, but when I teach here, people are thinking things of me. They're not giving me the promotions I deserve. They're talking behind my back. And so I'm constantly having to navigate where I'm at with them because nobody's brave enough to say, I don't like you, or you make me uncomfortable. And I think that's probably a bit of, there's a woman, White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo, I think some of you might have stumbled on it, really, really good read, she says in the beginning, being nice is not being racist. It's not the same thing as not being racist. And then she says, and being Canadian, because she always hears about Canadians, I'm Canadian, I can't be racist. That's our mentality. And I was doing an interview a while back with Global and they were saying, aren't we different? Like, we're so different. Look at our numbers and interracial marriages and we're so great. And I said, we've got to be really careful because that's the image we want to portray. We're multicultural. We love everybody. We love the food and we love the costumes. And no, we're talking so much deeper than the food and the costumes. We're talking, it is very much life and death. And I don't only mean being killed at the hands of police, but this is livelihood. This is not getting jobs that you deserve. This is me, I can tell you personal, going into my graduate degree and being told that I got there because I'm a Black woman. Well, my name doesn't sound Black. And as far as I know, I didn't put a picture on my application form. So it's kind of my credentials, but this is constant, fully having to defend myself, to prove myself. My entire life, I was told never go to university. All my education from elementary to high school, I wasn't smart enough and I should look at doing something else because I will not make it in university. So these are realities. This is a world that people are experiencing. And I just think that if we want to be together in doing this, these conversations have to happen. And it's a reality. And the biggest part is the defensiveness. If anyone is right now feeling like this is wrong, I don't want to hear this, that's okay. Don't be embarrassed about it. That is a natural reaction, especially when somebody, Laurie described it perfectly, is tearing down your vision of your world. We see things, I see things a certain way. Now, someone with a disability will start to talk to me and my lens might change for a moment. I'll think, I did not know that this was your life, but I can't possibly understand that experience without being in that situation. It's the same as us with our racialized differences.
Well, you know, this week, because the conversation has continued, talking to my daughter, who is teacher in elementary school, I think she's on here, had even mentioned through their courses that they're taking of expanding the lens. This was new to me as a 51-year-old. I actually thought it was 52 and just learned I'm 51. I'm like, yes.
I thought we were the same age. You fibbed.
I don't know. I don't know. I want that half year back. But even looking. So I'll throw this out to all of you, right? Like me, BandAids, Mackenzie tells me. Yeah, they're all white colored, right? And I remember seeing a makeup artist, right, having to concoct her own diatribe of foundation because she couldn't find a Clinique, like the top notable lines that would match her skin tone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
these are the things that for me, that's all of a sudden making me feel very uncomfortable.
Can I
I've never noticed that before.
can I take your example? So besides, people say, so what's wrong with having all white teachers? What's the big deal? Nothing's necessarily wrong with it. First of all, though, how it gets there, we've got to question, how can there only be white teachers in a school, which is common? But I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, a woman of color, her daughter is in school, and she asked her mother if only people with different skin color are the cleaning crew and teachers are all white. So now think about that. As a young person of color, if you're seeing everybody of status being white, it is saying something very loud to you. So the first teacher of color you have, you're going to go, oh my goodness, when I was teaching both at UBC and at Trinity, students were lined up to speak to me. There's this excitement like, oh my gosh, you can get here, and it helps them feel they can do the same thing, right? As far as teaching what we need to learn, it's very controlled, and history is very controlled. How many of you that I could see you from Canada knew that we had approximately 200 years of slavery here? It's not taught. Oh, Vera, that's impressive. Do you teach? No? Her sound is off. I'm sorry. Your sound is off. Can I ask you to put it? Are you allowed to? Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to be doing this, but I'd love to hear.
Well, just from reading and a lot of the books, but I can't remember her name now, but also Lawrence Hill.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Hearing him speak in Kelowna, and yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And I have to ask you to put your mic back on because Laurie's going to give me the stink eye. Thank you, Vera. Yeah, so this is a reality that people will not know. And so you ask, why do we have to know that there was slavery? Well, because all of a sudden you've got Black people on this continent and you're like, how the heck did that happen? Stories have to be told. You know, Japanese internment, didn't know about it. The Chinese head tax, didn't know about it. I had to educate myself on it. Now, kids are learning more and more as I teach in university. They seem to have a little bit more knowledge, but it's important to have the full picture of what's gone on, especially because you never want to repeat that again. And this is the reality of Canada. You know, it's not that Canada sucks. I love Canada, but we all have to be aware that there are things going on, and Indigenous, you're hearing more Indigenous issues. You know, the Highway of Tears and all the rest, I've been fortunate enough to teach on it, but these are not things you heard. There have been missing Indigenous women forever. And it's just in the last, well, what's his name? Robert Picton?
Picton, yeah. Yeah.
In because of him, it's come to light. It shouldn't become a travesty before we realize. It's a travesty when one goes missing, when two goes missing, when three people get killed by a police officer. It shouldn't happen. And as a society, we all have to be saying this is unacceptable, because these kids are going to school holding hands thinking this is all normal, and reality hits once they get out of there. The real world comes to.
Which you dovetail so beautifully into one of our questions was talking about the Indigenous and being Canada Day just celebrated, right? So lots of people making comments and movements on social media of recognizing, and I think there's even an app that you can acknowledge the territorial lands in which you're standing on, and that was sort of the message to this question. But what do we do? Because Canada really is a land of immigrants. So, you know, is there anything, again, it's that one innate feeling or thought that my brain will give me of going, okay, like, what am I supposed to do? And I throw up my hands, and then what do I want to do is I go run back and I hide. Well, I don't want to hide anymore. But what do we do?
I think, again, it's understanding this. I think Canadians have a very poor view of Indigenous people, and that does not happen by chance. That has been intentional. If you go back to history and, you know, the savages and they're going to scalp me and all the rest, these are things we are hearing, messages that we are taking in nonstop. So to think that we don't have biases would be a miracle. But we do. We take all of this on, and our brain starts to use it however we feel. I think once people start getting real about what Canada is, how it started, the damage that was done, and I'd really say once white people stop feeling that they have to hang on so tight, you know, it becomes an argument of they're taking everything away, you know, things were so perfect. Actually, things were not perfect. You know, they were for certain groups. And if we really want to get into history, we'd have to look at when the British and the French were here, they hated the Germans, they hated the Italians, they hated the Greek, they hated every group that came in. But because of skin tone, they were able to melt. So the people who started coming in, there was an expectation people of color would start to meld in and be a part of society. And there was a new realization that, oh my goodness, if your skin is brown and the darker it is, you never become an actual part fitting into society. So I think once we as a people start to recognize that this is broken and do something to fix it, yeah, we should celebrate Canada Day. But I think when we celebrate thinking everyone should be feeling the same way, we are intentionally ignoring or putting our blinders on for the reality of what the creation of Canada is. It's not that Canada is a horrible place. Like I said, born and raised, love my country. I don't like the stuff that goes on in it. And I prayed I would never have my boys experience the stuff I've experienced. And here we are. They are terrified to drive our vehicles because they could very well be pulled over. I know my nephews have, I know my brother has, like this is just a part of life. So my boys are out with a vehicle and I'm going to be at home terrified that they do the right thing if they get pulled over.
Mm-hmm. And that to me is, I would say for all of us here, I have our boys, that's how we also have melded, is our boys are friends. So, but they're all 20. And I've never had that one concern before. Right. And that was what got sucker punched me that morning when I reached out to you going, oh my gosh. Right. Like I'm seeing this in this, but again, my lens was, but that's in the States. Like sure as heck can't be happening here.
Yeah.
Right. And again, it's like, oh my gosh. Okay. Let's look a little deeper at this. And again, remember friends, I'm not saying we're going to solve any of this tonight. We are just simply starting to have a conversation. Like when my daughter told me today, have you ever thought about BandAids? I'm like, no, I haven't. Oh my gosh. What else am my lens maybe not looking to yet?
I see what you mean about BandAids. You're reading Peggy McIntosh, aren't you, Mackie? The Backpack of Privilege. Have you read that yet? Okay. It's hopefully coming.
Backpack of Privilege. Now you know what you're getting for Christmas. There you
go. Peggy McIntosh, she was an educator and had some, in the States, had some poor interaction with some Black women, African-American women. And they started to try to explain things. So she said, I'm going to start writing down things that I get to do that they don't. And she had a list of 100 by the end. And it was the Band-Aid, it was a concealer, it was not being stopped by a police officer. And she just goes off and lists them off. And that's what changed her actually. Mm. And she realized, okay, they're starting at a deficit and expected to live fully in society, but they're not being allowed to.
Sure. Yeah. Which then kind of raises the next question of, okay, if we want to embody this, what it looks like to be anti-racist, right? Like here you come out, and we kind of touched on it earlier. It was just like, well, doing it with the right intent, but all of a sudden it's like, okay, like how, and again, we're asking one person opinion of what, and recommending to 30 of us. Okay, now what do we do, Jen? Tell us, what do we do? But where do we start?
I can make recommendations, and you may not like them all. I'll try to do 3 just because 3 is an easy number to remember. Right. And I think you have to ask the last question when I say this. Yes. Okay. Is I think you have to, as white women, and I shouldn't be saying this. Usually if I was doing a workshop, a woman of color can't say this, but because I am here and I feel like when I'm in front of a firing squad, I'm stuttering to say, believe it or not, you have privilege. And it has nothing to do with you have a ton of money, you've had life easy. It's just that people will see you and you are accepted solely because of your skin color into positions and places that I might not go. So what I'd say, number 1, is use your privilege. Recognize it and use it. So I've seen white women speaking up. I'm interviewing mixed race couples, and the white women have become crazy advocates because their kids are now being treated poorly. And so they're speaking up for it. You have a platform, as Laurie is doing right now. Use your platform. That'd be the one thing I do, would suggest. What was the question again? I'm not good at these numbers here.
You're on to 3. The anti-racism. What would that look like? What could you suggest for us?
So recognize your privilege, use your privilege. The other is make yourself a little uncomfortable and check your lens, because you have been living your life seeing it a certain way. I challenge you to start to think of it in another way. And so people will say, find a Black friend. Yeah, don't just pull in a Black friend or an Indigenous friend and say, teach me. What I'm finding in my research, I'm sorry, I have to move on, I know, is that the closer you are to a person of color, so I'm looking at the most intimate relationship between husband and wife or partners, and they suddenly start to see what life is like for the other person. So I'm not suggesting you all intermarry, but when you are with somebody, start to look at life through their eyes and see what they are experiencing. And suddenly you're gonna go, I had no clue, but it will start to change your brain to start thinking differently and being a little bit more critical in what you hear and what people are saying. And I guess that would be my 3rd, is speak up. If you hear people saying things, I'm not saying that you should throw up your fists and start to fight, but challenge it. Even racist jokes. I remember when the whole PC came, people are like, oh, I'm so sick of this politically correctness. Now, if you're calling people awful things or reducing them, it's nothing about being politically correct when someone says that is not cool. Please don't say that. That makes me uncomfortable. It's not being politically correct. That's just being humane. You are caring for your brother and sister. You are caring for people so we can all be on this earth together and experience it in similar ways. But I think we've moved to a very individualistic type society where it's hard to look beyond ourselves. And I think that would be the biggest exercise of all, is what is it like for the person in the wheelchair? What is it like for somebody who feels like they live on the reserve, so they have to be drunks and incapable and all the rest? Because I'm telling you, it works both ways. Racism hits a person, and I know people are uncomfortable with being called racist. That's besides the point. It's a real thing, but it also is internalized by people who've received it every day. You can't be told you're stupid, you're dumb, you're useless, and it not allow that to seep in. As much as your parents can push that off and fight it, as much as you can be confident, it gets in there. So yeah, I hope that was helpful.
So helpful. So just to recap, I got 4, maybe 2 meld together, but recognizing and using our privilege. Love that. Make yourself uncomfortable and checking our lenses, which is amazing. And then which I guess checking your lenses is maybe folded into life through their lens, looking through their lens, and then not being afraid to speak up. Okay. So good. I mean, and all of the questions that I had were always asking, going, okay, but just tell me what to do. Like, because here we are. We are all women that have these hearts to serve and to be, and the word that keeps coming to mind is kindness, right? Like, we just want to be kind to our brothers and sisters, and that includes everyone. So it's like, okay, this just isn't going, but how do we do this?
This won't be fixed by kindness anymore. Being nice to me when I'm being called the N-word, which happened to me in my little market here, chased in the store, called the N-word. And this was not a crazy person. This is a man who had a beautiful ride, an Escalade, nicely dressed, but having a bad day. And I became the target. With my kids there, hearing him spew out hateful, hurtful things. And I use it in my class. I cried when I got home. I stayed very firm speaking to him and making sure my boys saw that I didn't need to, shrink back and run away. I spoke loud and repeated everything he said to me, because I thought if he starts to hit me and I hit back, I retaliate, I might be pulled over. I might be taken in by the cops. So every time he made a threat, I would say it out loud so everyone could hear it. Why'd I bring that up? I wasn't just trying to flash that story. I think I was talking about
kindness.
What you do.
Kindness.
Lineup of people, not a word said. And I am always, my husband warns me, he says, you're going to get beaten up because you're always jumping in. If I was to see that, I would be the first person to say, this is not okay. Please leave her alone. Men, women, everyone, huge lineup, and they watched. And funny, I brought it up in my class, and one of the students was actually there that day and was a cashier. And she says, we didn't know what to do. And I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes we've not been good at teaching people, is to respond. Right. And I think if you haven't had to live it, I know how to respond. I've had to live it. But for someone who hasn't, it's probably very difficult. So I think do learning, do reading, find out what you could say, how you can say it. Even there was a 15-year-old boy, I didn't realize it, who saw him chase me in the store. And so his mom was backing out. He jumped out of the car and said, Mom, he's going to hurt her. So he ran. I didn't know that. His mom told me after, when I was standing in line shaking, but he stood by me, and I didn't realize that until I came home. And I thought, yeah, that kid was pretty close to me, but he was trying to stand by me to protect me, a 15-year-old boy. So I take that back. One child decided to stand up for me, and everybody else watched the show. And I know their hearts weren't in a bad place. It's just, that is not an excuse anymore for us. We need to stand up for each other.
Yeah. And and again, this is why this conversation is, because we can hear this. And again, we're hearing it most likely from people in the States, and we can, sorry for my American friends on here, just say, yeah, but that's just how they do it. Right? But hearing that this is happening here, it's like, I literally feel like scales have been removed to say, it's not okay. This is not okay. And how can we do better? And the only I can be part of is me. Right? So what is it that I can do? And I love that all of your directives have been internal, of things that I am in control of, that I can do. So your last kind of point was about racism going both ways, leads us to the last question we had that came in, was asking about being on the other side of it as a white person, being on that side of receiving
racist behavior.
Yeah.
Well, there are two schools of thought, and I think it's an important question because it is really risque. And I think that if we're going to get uncomfortable, let's get uncomfortable. It's unfortunate that we have only a few minutes to do that. But there are two schools of thought on that. Some would say racism is just racism. The more scholarly way of thinking is racism isn't just the discrimination because of the color of someone's skin or their race. It would be race discrimination plus power equals racism. So if a person doesn't have power, so I guess depending on where you are in the world, Canada is primarily people in leadership positions and who would say built the nation are Europeans or ancestors of Europeans, right? So racism, and I guess we could call that systemic racism, has the power to reduce me to nothing. And worse, it could be done invisibly. So if I'm denied the right, there's something else called streaming, and this is done in Canada, and they just outruled it not that many years ago. They took it out of the educational policy in Ontario. Streaming is when you decide who should be in an academic stream and who shouldn't be. And what they found, and I saw the same in Calgary, is all of the Black and Indigenous kids were in the non-academic stream. And and they just recently realized this was a thing. But this is what I mean. So if you could get at somebody's personhood from the moment they are in any institution, school, hospital, jail system, like the whatever, criminal justice system, you can affect them in ways that you can't imagine. Like that could finish their life. I know men who have been wrongly accused, put in jail, back out, no life because they have a record. This is reducing people, and too common with different groups, right? That's racism, that's systemic, that's powerful. And so if I call you a name because you're bugging me and it's a racialized name and it's an insult, those are very different things, right? If we're calling each other names because we don't like each other's skin is very different than affecting my livelihood, my well-being, my future. Does that make sense? So if we look at it one way, everyone could be a racist. If we look at it another way, structure supports one kind of racism. And depending on where you are, that could shift. But in predominantly white countries, you'll see statistics showing you that it works for the white population more than any other population.
Sure.
That answer the question?
Yeah. Can you go back though? It was racism plus power equals, or what was
discrimination plus power equals racism. And that's become more of the popular way. If you're uncomfortable with that, then just say that's different. That's systemic racism, but racism is racism. There's no such thing as reverse racism. Racism is racism. It's just that there is a power. You probably see footage in the States where people are able to call the police and say, this Black person, and that's the word you have to drop and the police are there. In Canada, it would also be this Indigenous person, because there is a mindset, there's almost a less than human view of certain bodies. And so it isn't a big deal for them to die or for them to be slammed against the ground and handcuffed and whatever else. But you would rarely see that. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't happen to white people, but it's all too common, as we've seen. I didn't realize around George Floyd's death, there was a death of a young man in Brampton, Ontario, and I wish I got his name because I didn't know about this, who had schizophrenia. And he called the police because he was feeling out of control. And within 2 minutes, he had 2 shots in his chest, dead. This is in our Canada. So this is a reality. It happens here. Oh my goodness. Not to be grim, but it's very real.
Yeah, and that's why we wanted to be on here, right? Real and raw is kind of what was the seasoning that we offered for tonight. So, and I think that it's going to be that, right? Like as a coach, I always tell my clients, we're going to be uncomfortable either way. Like life is going to make us feel uncomfortable. We can be uncomfortable and move backwards, or we can be uncomfortable and push us forward. And as humans, we get to decide, right? We get to decide what that's going to be. Yeah. And I always come from this place of how do I get to choose to show up in the day, in the world, right? And so all of this, just even knowing this, remember, because one of the conversations and we kind of talked about it about an organization. So be it our church or our work, of how can they incorporate more? It's like, okay, yeah, we can start having that conversation with them. But it's ultimately, what are we in control of? Let's just, can you imagine if we all just dialed it back to like, what could I do? What lens can I wear today? And instead of going, yeah, but them, yeah, but. No. How about we just all stayed in our own lane and stuck to using our privilege that we have, making ourselves uncomfortable and checking the lenses and imagining somebody else's journey and life. And then speaking up when we see somebody being called out for in a grocery store and stepping up and stepping out, right? Like imagine that only requires us to be able to do that. And I
Yeah.
love that this conversation has started that, because I didn't know at the beginning, going, okay, what's the wrap up going to look like of now? How do we send everybody off with what they've learned?
Can I do a wrap up?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
it doesn't even have to be a wrap up. I would like to be even more vulnerable than I've been, and let you all in, all 25 of you in, on my my biggest fear right now. And it's funny because watching so many people get ramped up and upset over what's gone on has been exhilarating. But there's something in the pit of my stomach. And when I think about it, if I allow myself, it's that I am waiting for all of this to die down and everything to go back to normal, because I've been given just a faint hope that something might change. But I know we're busy. You know, once COVID season's gone and life gets back to normal, it'll go right to the same place. That is a fear. So I'm going to say I'm making a pact with all of you, or I'm hoping that you'll make a pact with each other and me, that even if you don't step out as much as I've suggested, that you do one thing that allows you to be different, be changed by all of this.
So good. And, you know, it's funny because I don't know if I included this, so we're on the same page here, because I wanted to do a challenge to everyone on here, is to consider continuing the conversation, right? Here you are, you maybe know one or two people on here.
Oh, more than that.
But now you, and I'm talking to all of you, now go make a plan, have a Zoom call with 4 other of your friends. Start this conversation. It's going to be each one of us that continues this ripple and this wave. And how our tidal waves made is by just a little bit of movement. And it can't just be one little drop in it. It's got to be all of us doing what we can and not waiting for the neighbors to do it first. And so how easy is that? Tomorrow's Friday, a week Friday, whatever that is. To Jen's point, don't let this die down because we're getting back into a new normal and we get back to going shopping or whatever that looks like. I have no idea what real life looks like outside of COVID, but just continue the conversation going. Ask questions. And I guess maybe that we have 2 minutes because I had said we'd go for the full hour. What would you say again? You're representing your own self and your own comfort level. But I think one of the questions that I didn't think to ask is, you know, can we be asking, what can we do to people that are of different race? Like, do you think we're at that place now that we can start to say, can I have this conversation with you? Yeah. And what happens if it's not met with as beautifully open arms as yours was?
Okay, thank you for the compliment with the question. I would say it's just different for everybody. But when you know people and have a relationship with people, it's different. If I was just to look at my random experience in reading and looking at, I would say the US is different, and just being there for conferences. And that, again, is too much of a generalization. But I'd even say East to West is different. What they've experienced in the US, I never got it. And again, my lens as a Black woman in Canada is very different than the lens of a Black person in the States. The anger, the hurt, and it's devastation after devastation after devastation. I've experienced stuff, but I haven't had my cousin killed, my brother killed. And when you talk to people, this is all too normal. So I guess what I'd say is it might be a different answer out there. If I'm talking here, I would say get to know different people. And once you start getting to know different people and you make them aware that you care and you want to see change happen, I can almost guarantee you that they'll say, this is what's going on. Let's have these conversations. I think it's relationship that we miss. So don't look for the next person that has darker skin than you and say, I got to ask you questions. Actually have a relationship. And the closer you get, the more you get to peek into. You won't experience it, but you get a peek into what their lives are like and what they've had to endure. And believe me, just the same as Canadians don't like to talk about it, for people of color as well, Canadians, we've learned so much to mask this stuff. And to hear even my friends of color talking like I've never heard them speak before, like we're having conversations like, I didn't know you felt that way, because we've just learned to shut it down, because I think some people would just lose it. And others would fight an all-out war. So you just learn to tone that all down. I think it is a beautiful, I don't know, I think it's a beautiful gesture to care and talk about it and say, you know, I care and love you. I want this to change too, because you're not, I don't see anyone feeling resentful about someone wanting to carry the load with you. Granted, I'm hearing people I'm hearing my Black community in the back going, they don't know what it's like to carry the load. I hear that, I understand that. But being willing to understand and get a little bit dirty and get uncomfortable and get in the hole with me is a beautiful thing.
So good. I wish we had more time, but I wanted to just honestly respect everybody's time for this. So that is a wrap. That is, and you know what, the way I'm going to leave it is a conversation to be continued. I really do encourage all of you, just go continue to have that conversation. And I know Jen would be open to questions. She's uber busy doing all of her mastery that she's doing and moving from UBC back to Trinity and stuff. But if you have any further questions for Jen, please send them to me and I will somehow combine it and get back to you. If there's something, because we got all the ones that I got emailed, but if something else comes up, please do that and we'll get back to that. Anything else you want to add, my friend?
Yeah, I just don't want to keep everyone long. I would say, don't let it be the guilt that dominates, because I think we can get lost in, I feel so horrible, this is terrible, and then stop and hide. I'd say don't let that be the emotion that dominates. You have been given power, we all have. Use it for good rather than getting buried in the guilt. That's, to me, it's somewhat of a useless emotion.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And everybody's saying thank you on the side. So there you go.
Oh, that's
all right. Friends, it was lovely to see all of
me.
you here. All right, Jen, thank you, my friend. And we'll talk soon. Okay. Okay. Bye for now.